Hello, you're listening to Milton Fenimoore, an audiobook read by Ballerscheff. If you'd like to read along to the actual text of this story, then you can find a link to that in the description of this video. Milton Fenimoore sat at his desk. It was wider than he was tall and took up half his office. To the right of him, more than an arm's length away, lay a reminder to call a carpenter. One of his desk's legs was short. Somehow he had managed to avoid the problem all these years by putting a book underneath, really more of a brochure on the town's history. Even in all this time, the table leg hadn't made a scratch on the cover. That workaround wasn't good enough anymore. He eased himself down from his chair and onto his own short legs, then waddled over to his mirror to inspect his round body. Had it gotten rounder? He just barely cleared the fitness test last time. His rank commanded more respect than him. When someone reaches a certain age and number of accomplishments, they can look back on their life with something to fix their mind on. As a major, Milton Fenimoore couldn't speak about the battlefield at the distance of a general. Still, he had always been safer than the average private in his company, except once, when somebody misfired and nearly shot him. Those in other companies, privates and officers alike, were less fortunate. It wasn't just his body that was going. His word counted for less and less every year. His career and all that came with it was being wrenched out of his hands like a toy taken from a naughty child. It was as if it had already happened. Why wait for the inevitable then? Why delay it? Soon he would be asked to retire by some superior he could safely assume was speaking for more people than just himself. That was better than being forced out, he supposed. However it happened, he wouldn't know what to do afterwards. A friend suggested he write his memoirs, like many a mayor has done, usually with as much reason as Milton. After such a long life, it seemed the logical thing to do, even pleasant, a summary of sorts. His name gave him an easy in with strangers. Some thought they knew where his father had taken inspiration from. Most just thought him strange. It was for that reason he decided to call the book Major Milton Fenimoore, My Life, though the title would be redundant. Many, he began, stopping every so often to ponder whether it really was as he wrote. Go into the army because they don't know what to do. You could say anything you wanted about many people in a world as big and populated as this one. Unless it was impossible, it was true of somebody somewhere. He had wanted to be a soldier ever since he knew what that was. His life had been too good for him to be tricked into joining because of some inner need which being a soldier might fulfill. His parents treated him well. They gave him most of what a boy can want, everything he needs. They hadn't even forbidden him from joining the army, the last possible way someone could be made to rush into something out of rebellion. Milton talked about this singular aspiration every day for a week when he first learned you could make a career out of it. His parents never let on whether they approved, accepting the plans he announced with neutral expressions. He still didn't know what they really thought. They congratulated him on every rank he reached, but would they have been happier if he had done something else? What a funny thought to have, just as it was all about to end. Like many of his age, he had fought other boys with whatever he could imagine to be a gun or a sword, mainly sticks. Milton had gone at it with more energy than others, though he still treated it as play. He now searched family photo albums for illustrations of each milestone in his life. For his childhood, he found photos of him as a boy who seemed to wear only short pants. He had been big for his age, straining against the seams of his clothes because of muscle, not fat. How did you get so strong, his grandmother would say at every visit Milton paid her. His mother often said the same, as she laid Milton's old clothes aside for charity. This was his first memory of looking to the army. His immediate family had no legacy in the military. His grandfathers and one uncle did, though that turned out to be incidental. When he visited them as a boy, they didn't really talk about it except as just another part of their lives, one which they didn't find especially important. They had been drafted, but came out of it unharmed. What was there to say? They didn't feel it was a waste of time, nor did being a soldier fascinate them as it did Milton, whose interest they explained by his age. They always answered his questions, but sometimes they lied and said they didn't remember. He joined as soon as he could. Knowing that his departure would hurt them more than him, he spent his last day as a civilian with his parents and friends, doing all he could for their happiness. Milton had something to look forward to. They had only their day-to-day with which to adjust to his absence. A private is a private, one as lowly as the other, until they aren't. His time in this rank was repetitive, not that he expected anything else. Cleaning his quarters took all the grease out of his elbows. Marching made his legs feel like stumps. His company didn't stop until they seemed completely gone. He was good at keeping to himself. Other soldiers had no reason to dislike him, though some found they could make do without. His superiors didn't hear him complain. Maybe it was this that endeared him to everyone. He was uncomplicated, a strong man who encouraged those weaker than him, and who did as he was told. He called home regularly, but talked quietly so as not to disturb others. To those that heard him, whether on the other end or as they eavesdropped, he may only be a voice, but a very lively one. That's how Milton found his first friends in the army. They had listened in on his conversation, not to pry, but unwillingly, as you do when someone next to you is talking. Two privates he shared quarters with heard a joke he made to his mother. Laughter can't be suppressed in any way but physically. Both men put a hand to their mouths. However, it was too late for that. All they could do was blush at being discovered. It had been a parting joke. Milton hung up, then said something else to make them laugh. It wasn't funny enough for him to remember it now, but he could still see how the both of them had bent over, as if from punches, as they laughed. The three of them often went out to drink together and to talk in the privacy of a bar crowd about nothing important. They made plans in drunken stupors and forgot them the next day with no sense of having lost anything. They kept to their bets more closely. Some time between drinks, the shorter of the pair, Lawrence, asked Milton what he would do after the army. He knew by then how much being a soldier meant to Milton, but even he must know he couldn't do this forever. If he did, he seemed to have realized this only recently. He had no plans. Then he had taken a sip from his drink, not quickly, embarrassed not to have an answer, or slowly, to show he wasn't ashamed, but just to enjoy the taste. Lawrence mentioned a family, going back to his parents, or maybe he wanted to start his own. Remembering it now, Milton wondered if he had misheard him or forgotten something. Was that all he had said? Milton had drank before, but not had anyone to play drinking games with or a reason to. Was it bad to lose and have to drink? That's what they were there for, after all. No, it was better to win and get to drink. The rules were senseless, but seemed more reasonable the more they followed them. He included 2 scenes like this and cordoned them off into their own chapter. They were necessary exactly because they weren't important. His life was more than milestones in a career, however strongly he felt drawn to it. On the day Milton was chosen as an officer, he and his friends celebrated until midnight. They wanted to keep going, but knew they had to get up tomorrow. The 3 of them went to bed with dazed, drunken smiles and talked excitedly like little boys about how great it was that this had happened. Milton assured them they'd get their promotions too. If I get a say, it'll be a sure thing, he said. A promotion meant new duties and different housing somewhere else. Milton realized this that very night. His tight lips went slack, his big eyes bunched up. He felt sick. He almost was sick, but managed to keep it down. This was the first time he cried in a long while, and on the day of his promotion, too, not when he left his family or at any point of his training. The drills he had endured were supposed to break him down so he could be built up again, but really it was just more of what he was used to. His friends were too deep in sleep to console him. He fumbled in the dark until he found tissues. It took 3 to clean him up. On the anniversary of his promotion, he, Lawrence, and the taller man had been separated for too long to be anything but strangers. His friends were all officers of an equal or higher rank, not that Milton was a snob. He took orders as usual, but now he gave them too, leading a company in drills. With time, he had the same stoic expression his own officer had worn. The only photos the albums offered him for this period were portraits of Milton in a uniform that had more and more medals each time. Every rank past private simply expanded the scope of his usual duties for other soldiers. He didn't remember all of this perfectly. In fact, he was quite sure what he was mistaken about, but his guilt at having left his friends came through. This time, his face stayed dry. He had no tissues and needed none. No, he told himself, the promotion had separated them. Should he have refused a promotion? An instinctive no settled the question for him. And what was he feeling sorry for anyway? Maybe they would have done the same in his position. Maybe they didn't think badly of him at all. He had once had a rival, another officer, corrupt in every way, but good at hiding it. The man seemed to feel that his position came with certain privileges, besides those of rank and pay. Privileges he felt would be wasted if he didn't make use of them. Milton tried to catch him out many times, but had to stop being so open about his investigation for the sake of his career. The rival officer began to think of him as a nuisance instead of an amusing failure. In either case, he was sure Milton had lucked into his position, as he made very clear in their first and only direct confrontation. To satisfy his conscience and yet keep his rank, Milton dropped off the evidence he had collected at a superior's office anonymously. He learned from Barak's rumors that the officer was gone. No word on how much his packet of files had helped. It made him proud to remember this little incident, and even prouder to write about it. It wasn't boasting if he had a reason, was it? He went about his memoirs honestly and with his usual discipline. In preparation, Milton read memoirs to know what was good and what wasn't. He copied out entire passages in his notebooks. The idea was that the physical effort of moving a pen made you pay more attention. The whole process cost him 10 pens and 2 months' progress on his own book. The Army's library was still open to him for the time being, which meant that he wasn't burdened with the cost or with the books themselves after he had finished studying. The end he put to this practice was just as abrupt as its beginning. It wouldn't be good to read a memoir while writing one. The two would become confused in style, if not also a little in content. He made a list of the mistakes he found, none of which had occurred to him before. Some claimed an officer was using tactics or theories they invented, or that they had helped train a famous soldier, trying in either case to involve themselves in current events, if only in the most tenuous way. Others exaggerated what they'd done. By the time someone writes a memoir, historians have nailed the facts of a battle down. Rather than inflate statistics, these bored officers talked about what could have been, what the enemy could have done if their company's outpost had fallen, what their presence there had prevented. Milton had no battles to look back on. He had trained soldiers. His retirement coincided with the start of the war, but that had nothing to do with him anymore. Truthfully, he found the idea of killing a bit distasteful, though with the right justification, he could have stomached it. Why go to the trouble of lying about something so minor? Nobody who read his memoir would ever meet him, that is, if it was ever published. He wouldn't be stripped of his rank either. It was hardly much of a confession. He talked about his plans to his circle of friends. Some of them were from the army, but they were all either retired or retiring, just like his friends in other professions. Jim was the one exception. As a painter, he could keep working as long as his body and mind let him. He'd shown them some of his canvases to general approval. Was Milton jealous? He searched himself, rifling through memories and pulling feelings apart to see if a trace of this jealousy could be found. Nothing. Maybe it had sensed his approach and fled. If so, he wouldn't give chase. Discussing his memoir meant telling them things like his rivalry with the other officer, which he had never had a reason to mention before. If you asked his friends whether retired officers sometimes wrote memoirs, they would have answered yes. They didn't know that for sure, but people wrote about everything, so someone must have. Milton was therefore far more prepared as a memoirist than his friends were as readers of such material. Some of them said they had always wanted to write something and congratulated him on his future achievement. He was embarrassed by all this fuss. There was nothing special about it, he said. That was true, but missed the point. Special or not, he was their friend, and so it was their job to help him see this through. When he had finished thanking them, Milton asked if someone else couldn't talk for a while. His friends relieved him of his post as speaker. The conversation turned back to his friends' retirements. He smiled when each said how many years they had been working. Then the retirement would be well deserved, he said. Milton listened to everyone, but with every meeting he talked more and more to his army friends, trying to hold on to a part of his life that would soon be entirely in the past. He had just drafted the sections on his boyhood and early career when an email came saying he was being retired. The next day he cleaned out his office, something easily done since he lived on base. The note about the table leg lay there on the desk, untouched since he first wrote it. He left it there as a reminder for the next officer. Maybe they wouldn't leave it until it was too late. His desk was otherwise neat. He didn't take long to pack his belongings. Once that was done, he looked back on the now bare office. His mouth shrank into a frown that lasted until the day of his farewell ceremony. He enjoyed this last show of attention. With all other connections to the army severed, Milton met up with his friends, either to reminisce and so find some incident in his career which his memory had overlooked, or else to hear their impressions of what he had written. He requested their opinions without any tricks, and not because he couldn't think of any. Why hide what he had admitted? His work kept him busy for months. He had enough material to go on for as long as he lived, but his friends, army and otherwise, didn't want to look back anymore. Milton admitted the book was getting out of hand. He sent it to a small publishing firm, and, after spending another year editing, had nothing more to do with it. In all that time he kept quiet and learned what the others in his circle were doing. What few royalties he received went towards a dinner. Rather than draw attention to himself and make a speech, Milton mentioned what the occasion was in passing. It was late in the evening when they all said goodbye. Walking back up the road to his house, he grinned at what a success everything had turned out to be. Now he really had nothing to do. He found his next goal just as quickly as he had his last. Milton jogged every morning before he ate. Later in the day, he worked on all the rest of his body that was in decline. He judged his progress by numbers and by looking at himself in the mirror. Truthfully, he found the second more accurate, for a reason he couldn't explain. His exercise seemed to stuff loose hanging skin back inside of him. He even felt firmer. That this renewed effort came after retirement meant there was no official record of it as far as the army was concerned. Understand that Milton had already been all that a soldier should be, besides his qualms about killing, long before he enlisted. The army had given him a schedule which he now took it upon himself to enforce. He did all the drills through which he used to lead new recruits, although because he wore civilian clothes and jogged alone, onlookers didn't know all this. They figured he was just an old man getting back into shape, which, stripped of all his history, he was. Even when Jim and two other friends joined him, that impression remained. That was Milton Fenimore, read and written by Philip Ballerscheff. Again, if you'd like to read the text of the story, you can find a link to that in the description of this video. As always, remember to like, share, and subscribe, not just to this YouTube channel, or as the case may be, the Spotify channel, but also to the blog itself. That way you can read and you can get notifications whenever I upload a story in just text format or also audio. Well, in that case, until next time.